Coca-Cola, I think, ever since I described it that way, in terms of I talked about in terms of the probabilities that they would dominate the soft drink market and not lose market share in any way, that they would grow over time. It's happening year after year. I don't think the global market share of Coca-Cola products has ever been higher than it is now, and I don't see anything that changes that in the future. I mean, it is a huge distribution system that has been getting into the minds of more and more consumers since 1886, when John Pemberton, at Jacobs Pharmacy in Atlanta first served up the first one. It is in the minds of people, the product, all over the world, and there'll be more people and it will be in their minds more firmly, and over time they should make a little more per drink. I don't know how in the world anybody would successfully dethrone Coca-Cola.
There will be 1.9 billion 8-ounce servings of Coca-Cola products, not Coca-Cola, but Coca-Cola products consumed in the world today. And I don't think you're going to see anything revolutionary, and I think you will see all food and beverage companies adjust to the expressed preferences of the consumers as they go along. No company ever does well ignoring its consumers, but there will be, I would predict 20 years from now, there will be more people, there will be more Coca-Cola cases consumed than there are now by some margin. Back in the late 1930s, Fortune ran an article saying that the growth of Coca-Cola was all over, and when we bought our Coca-Cola stock in 1988, people were not that enthused about gross profitabilities for the product. I sit here as somebody who, in the last 30 years, 1/4 of all the calories I've consumed come from Coca-Cola. And that is not an exaggeration. I am 1/4 Coca-Cola. I'm not sure which quarter, but if you really, I don't think there is this choice. I think there's a lot to be said about being happy with what you're doing. If I'd been eating broccoli and Brussels sprouts and all that all my life, I don't think I'd live as long. Every meal I would approach thinking, it's like going to jail or something. And no, I think, Charlie? Charlie's 91, and his habits aren't that different than mine. They're slightly better. But
yeah, there's no question about it. The way I look at it is, sugar is an enormously helpful substance. It prevents premature softening of the arteries. And the way I look at it is that if I die a little sooner, that'll just be avoiding a few months of drooling in a nursing home.
Charlie and I have enjoyed every meal we've ever had virtually, except when I was eating at my grandfather's, and he maybe eat those damn green vegetables. But there obviously are some shifts in preferences, although it's remarkable how durable items are in this field. Berkshire Hathaway, I believe, was the largest shareholder of General Foods from about 1981 or thereabouts to about 1984 when it was bought by Philip Morris. And that's 30 plus years ago, and those same brands, they went through Philip Morris, they got spun out as Kraft, they broke Kraft into two pieces, but now we're going to own those brands, and they're terrific brands. But, Heinz goes back to 1869. The ketchup came out a little later. They went bankrupt actually when they were counting on the horseradish or whatever it was. But But the ketchup came out in the 1870s, and Coca-Cola dates to 1886. And it's a pretty good bet that an awful lot of people are going to like the same thing. And when I compare drinking Coca-Cola, to something that somebody would sell me at Whole Foods, I don't know. I don't see smiles on the faces of people at Whole Foods.
Asa Candler, back in the late 1880s, in a series of transactions, I think some of it's a little fuzzy exactly as to the timing of them, but he essentially bought the whole Coca-Cola company for $2,000. And that may be the smartest purchase in the history of the world. And then in 1899, I believe it was, a couple of fellows from Chattanooga came down. And in those days, soft drinks were sold over the counter to people in drugstores primarily. But there was a little bottling going on. There's already was somebody bottling in Mississippi, as I remember. But a couple of fellows came down and they said, bottling's got a future, and you're busy on the fountain side of the business, so why don't you let us develop the bottling system? And I guess Mr. Candler didn't think much of bottling, so he gave them a contract in perpetuity for almost all of the United States. For $1, he sold it to them, and gave them the right to buy Coca-Cola syrup at a fixed price forever. So Asa, who had scored with his $2,000 in a rather big way, managed to write what, it's easy for us to look back at, but it certainly looks like one of the dumbest contracts in history. And of course, as the years went by, and particularly around World War II, when the price of syrup was the primary ingredient in terms of cost in syrup, was sugar. And sugar went wild during and after World War I in price. And so here was a guy that in effect had contracted to sell sugar at a fixed price forever. And he'd also given these people perpetual rights and so on. In those days, they sold these sub-rights to bottler contracts, and those were usually the distance that a horse could go in a day and come back. That was sort of the circle that you gave people. And the Coca-Cola company was faced over the years with the problem of having the bottling system, which soon became the dominant system for distribution of Coke, being subject to a contract where there was no price flexibility and where the contracts ran in perpetuity. And of course, every bottler on his deathbed would call his children and his grandchildren around, and he'd prop himself up and croak out in his last breath, don't let him screw with the bottling contract, and then he'd croak. So the Coca-Cola company faced this for decades, and they really couldn't do much about that bottling system for a long time. And Roberto and Don Keogh and some other people spent 20 or 25 years getting that rationalized. There were lawsuits back in the 20s and some things. But it was a huge project, but it made an enormous difference over time in the value of the company. And that's what I mean when I talk about intellectual capital, is because you aren't going to get results on that in a day or a week or a month or a year if you set out to get that all rationalized. But they decided that to get the job done, they had to do this. And that took capital, and they used capital to get that job done, but they used capital beyond that to repurchase shares in a big way. And it's been very smart, and I hope they are repurchasing shares probably as we talk, and that's fine with me. Charlie?
Well, I do think Coca-Cola Company is one of the most interesting cases in the history of business, and it ought to be way more studied than it is. And there's just lesson after lesson after lesson in the history of the Coca-Cola Company. But it's too long a story for today.